How's it going, everybody? I'm Joe Dandron. He's Eli McKown from the State News, your MSU football beat writers, and Michigan State falling for a second straight week. They've been outscored 73-7 in the last two games. Michigan State falling to number 10 Indiana, at the time number 10 Indiana, 24-0. First home shutout since, I believe, October 12th, 1985, when the Spartans were shut out at home 31-0 against the Michigan Wolverines. And it's their first home shutout loss that they've had since '85, I should say. And Eli, it's turnovers again. Michigan State had 4 turnovers in the game, caused actually a couple of turnovers. Shakur Brown with 2 interceptions for the Michigan State defense, who only gave up 3 points in the second half, and we'll get to that. But Michigan State, up and down, turnovers really remaining the only consistent thing about this team, if we're being honest. And so Eli, I guess just get right into it. Michael Penix leads the Hoosiers. They're now number 9 in the country opening up this week. They have not been in a spot like that in a long time, and they're going to play Ohio State this weekend in a top 10 matchup.
Yeah, this was a game where the offense, this was the final straw for trying to run this offense the way they did in the first couple weeks against Rutgers and against Michigan. And, you look at this game, it's a 24-0 game. Michigan State shuts out Indiana in the second half. No points are scored in the second half whatsoever. 17 of Indiana's 24 points came off of Michigan State's turnovers. And 17 of those points, they each started on Michigan State's own half of the field. That's not a winning formula. It wasn't against Rutgers. It wasn't against Iowa. And it wasn't against Indiana once again. The defense really only allows 7 points in this game straight up from their point of view. They have a few goal line stops. They were able to do some really good things. And, really, you look back, the only thing that one touchdown they had was off of bad coverage by Shakur Brown, Ty Freifogel, who had an amazing day, phenomenal day.
Yeah.
And he goes 63, 65 yards for a touchdown, and that was pretty much what sealed it. And it was also the final straw for Rocky Lombardi, it seems like, at least for the time being. It looks like, we'll see what happens. Mel Tucker's always very adamant that it's an evaluation every day. Every day is an evaluation period. We'll see who ends up coming out. I would personally be shocked if this Saturday, and we'll get into this later, if it's the following Saturday, depending on what happens with this Maryland game for this upcoming Saturday, whether this ends up being, I'd be very shocked if it ends up being Rocky Lombardi who takes the first snaps for Michigan State against Maryland. After he comes in, and these 2 interceptions, I was somebody who was defending Rocky Lombardi early in the season. You look at the Rutgers game, miscommunication with Naylor on a route, misses him, looks like Naylor maybe run the wrong route, has a couple fumbles, but the offensive line kind of collapses on him, and it's like, well, were those turnovers really his fault? He has a good game against Michigan. Iowa, looks like he's maybe a little banged up, and then he comes into this game where this didn't look like an area where he was banged up. It looked like he just flat out made bad throws.
Yeah.
These were throws into double coverage, bad decisions, and that was costly for him. And that's what ends up where you see Peyton Thorne steps in. He has a big play to start where he goes, takes off, and runs for about 30, 40 yards. After that, not too much from him, but he brought a new dimension to the offense where he was able to run the ball something that Michigan State didn't have before. I think that adds something new for this offense to try to maybe get some things going, try to game plan that way and scheme your way against Maryland that way. We'll see. But this was an indictment on the offense, and also just to show that this Indiana team is, in my opinion, still the second best team in the Big Ten East and the second best team in the Big Ten, in my opinion, going forward. They are this good of a football team.
Really, there are some questions now. Obviously the Michigan win was a big moment for this team, and I think long-term will be a big moment for recruiting, especially with how Michigan's season is going. There's a lot of talks, can MSU flip East Lansing wide receiver Andrel Anthony? That game meant something, regardless of where these two teams stand now. It meant something at the time. And, do I think that Michigan State should have gone to Peyton Thorne? Maybe either week 1 or, just straight up at the start of the season. I think in a lot of ways, yeah, but I think Lombardi is a leader in this locker room. And that Michigan State really thought that was the guy who gave them the best option. And from an experience standpoint, I believe that was true. But this team has some problems, especially on the offensive line, especially with the run game. And I think that's glaringly obvious at this point.
And I think, in all fairness to guys like Rocky Lombardi and Peyton Thorne, who we have questions about, and we have questions about if there is a quarterback on this team that can lead this team to bigger heights. We have those questions. Is there somebody on this roster now who can take Michigan State there? I think part of that, though, for these quarterbacks who right now who are either very young and don't have a lot of experience, or a guy like Rocky Lombardi who's having issues throwing the ball, maybe he's a little bit banged up, some of these things. It would help if he had an offensive line who could block for him and then also open up holes in the run game so they can be a little more variety and have more variety in their offense. There needs to be credit given to this Indiana team. There's been a lot of questions. There still are a lot of questions going into Indiana where a lot of people are still doubting this Indiana team. This is a team that has a legitimate defense. Talking with a reporter from the Indiana Daily Student last week, he talked about this. It was like, this defense is what's been leading the way. Even though Michael Penix has put up some of these big numbers in some of these games, he's had a couple interceptions. He's made some of those mistakes. We saw it against Michigan State last week where they weren't able to get the ball in the end zone. And some of that you could say, well, maybe they don't go for field goals or things like that, whatever. But, this is a defense for Indiana that is legitimate. They have playmakers all over the field. They shut down Michigan State everywhere. They were able to take advantage of all their mistakes that they were able to make in this game. And you got to give Indiana credit going forward. And I think in this Ohio State game, they're going to cause some fits for them.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. I mean, and you look at some of the numbers here. I'm a big numbers guy, so I want to touch on some of these. I mean, Indiana, 7 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 3 interceptions. I mean, a lot of that, some things, the turnovers, especially the first 2 interceptions, can be attributed to poor decision making. But this defense, you're right, is good. The offense, flashy as can be, right? You got Stevie Scott, Wap Fillier, Ty Freifogel, Michael Penix. You got names and you got guys who can play at a high level. But this defense, Micah McFadden, this stat line was one that, really popped to me, as a guy who I hadn't really heard a lot about personally. But, I mean, he's a guy who, watching that game, made plays all over the field. 9 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, the linebacker spot. On the other side, Antoine Simmons had a great game for Michigan State. But this Indiana defense is good. They only gave up 191 yards of total offense. And, you're going to be in football games when your defense is capable of doing that. And as much as we want to point to maybe the, lack of continuity on offense for Michigan State, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, Michigan State's defense couldn't get off the field on 3rd down just as much as the offense was putting them in bad positions. But also, Michigan State's offense was 3 of 12 on 3rd down. You're not going to be in football games like that. I guess, Eli, Michigan State, we can go to this now. Michigan State going to be playing Maryland this coming weekend. Supposedly, we don't know if that's, that can change just as everything does so frequently in today's world. So Maryland, who beat Minnesota, who beat Penn State, got whooped up on by Northwestern. I guess, and Penn State, who was 0-4 this year, that team definitely has problems too. So that matchup between Michigan State and Penn State is going to look a lot different than it has in recent years. So I guess, Eli, just what do you think about this game on Saturday? And do you want to touch on kind of where we stand in that situation as well with where the Maryland game is?
So this is a Maryland team that's a lot of unknowns. And it's also like, who is and isn't going to play for Maryland? Like, we don't know who has COVID, who isn't, who's got in contact trace, who's recovering, who's still going through the cardiac testing that the Big Ten has. This weekend's totally a question mark for whether it gets played, who's playing. There's no other way to describe it. We'll see what ends up happening, I guess.
Yeah, in that game, as we kind of wrap up here for our recap of Saturday's game, that game's going to be an interesting one to see if it even happens. In the state of Michigan, high school sports have been put on pause. High school football, which had the quarterfinals coming up this weekend, is not going to be played for 3 weeks. So that's going to look, are they going to end up playing at Ford Field like they normally do? So there's a lot of things up in the air this week for a lot of different levels in athletics, professional, college, and high school. So, like I said, Michigan State falling this past weekend. To now number 9 Indiana, 24-0 in East Lansing. They will be playing Maryland, planned at noon at Maryland this weekend. So that game, we'll have coverage of that on statenews.com. Follow Eli and I and all of our coverage along on there, along with all the other State News sports coverage. Like I said, Joe Dandron, Eli McKown, I think it's going to do it for us today. Thanks.